Welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast. This week we have an amazing, unexpected conversation where we explore the questions, what's it like to work for Elon Musk? How do his companies achieve so much with so few people in such a short amount of time? And how do you get Bluetooth to work inside someone's body as part of the Neuralink system? This is actually not the main subject of the podcast. It's kind of a gem that I fell upon in my conversation with Kevin DeWalt, who's the founder and principal at SimpleBLE. And I agreed to interview him, was approached by him and his team. And what he's working on is a really cool project for anyone that's building Bluetooth low energy systems. SimpleBLE offers a great way of getting things done faster. And it leverages the experience that Kevin got working as part of the Neuralink team, fusing the sensing and motor functions from human beings with Bluetooth. So I love this. You go into a conversation, you expect one thing, and you get something completely different. And it's one of the reasons why I love doing this podcast. So this is kind of a bit of an Easter egg in the interview. The first part of our interview does focus on SimpleBLE, which if you're a geek and interested in ambient Internet of Things and how to connect the physical world to AI and the cloud, that'll be of interest. If you are fixated and interested in how Elon Musk runs his companies and how Neuralink works and how they get so much done, then you'll need to fast forward into the second part of the podcast to get that. In the meantime, I'm enjoying my life post Wiliot. Wiliot was a wonderful company pushing back the boundaries of battery-free Bluetooth technology, and I left it after almost 8 years to start up Ambi, and things are going well. Tons of people engaging us about this AI app and network. We're fundraising. If any of you have contacts in the VC community that you think would be interested in fusing the real world with LLMs and making AI omniscient, understanding everything everywhere all at once, then point me at them or point them at me. That's it. I'll let you listen to the conversation with Kevin. It's a great one, including his music selections, his 3 songs that have special meaning to him. So do stay till the end, and thanks for listening. So Kevin, welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
I noted that your marketing budget is, what was it? A sandwich and
a paperclip.
$3?
Yeah, $3, yeah.
Very good. Well, I'm pleased to be part of that. Let's do our bit and ask you to tell us what is SimpleBLE? What's the company that you're heading up?
Yeah, so this is a project that started almost 5 years ago at this point. To give a bit of a background, I've worked with Bluetooth since I was a college student because it's a great protocol. You can do great things with it. And unfortunately, what happened was that every time I wanted to develop something with it, I was running into some limitations around the availability of good software libraries to use Bluetooth. In particular, when it came to desktop environments, there were no good solutions around it. And most of the ones I could find online were either abandoned or in the process of being abandoned, or wouldn't use the technologies I needed them to use. I mean, most of my programming is C, C++, and there were no good libraries that were also cross-platform and would be helpful. But there was basically none of that. And after dealing with these problems for so long, I decided, okay, you know what? I'm doing it myself. I know what I want, I know what I need, and I'm going to start working with that.
I think so much of what entrepreneurs do is that it's like frustration. The world should be this way. It's not. No one else is going to fix it. I guess it's going to be me. I'm going to do it.
Correct. I mean, yes, and that's how it started. I mean, it's not a project that was born, I would say, out of love. It was born out of spite. It's this idea like it can't be that something this simple is so complicated. It just can't, and it drove me crazy. And yeah, it took a lot of effort. The initial implementation was Linux only. I had done some like past attempts with as part of one of my previous jobs, but we never like the whole like vision was born after a bit after that. And the goal here was mainly to think, okay, what are the reasonable use cases you would have for Bluetooth? Basically, scanning for devices, connecting, interacting with services and characteristics, and then and having a simple way of doing it, because not having to worry about all the abstractions of the operating system, because every OS implements it differently, not only at the sort of API layer, but also the architectural layer is a little bit different. So for example, Linux has this concept of you have an adapter and a peripheral, and the adapter connects to the peripheral. On Mac OS, for example, you have the adapter, you scan, you find peripherals, but then you tell the adapter, hey, connect to this peripheral. So the notification that the peripheral successfully connected comes from the adapter as well, not from the peripheral. And Windows as well has its own like mess around like WinRT, and every OS has its own layer of abstractions around that. And the way they implement is like completely different. And it didn't seem, and for me it was like, okay, there's no reason for this to be so hard. There has to be an easier way to deal with this. And in the end, it was just about, okay, let's design the API first. Let's think about what I need as a user, and then handle all the painful abstractions in the backend, and to make it completely transparent. And again, this was a project that I was doing for myself to help me at work. I mean, it was mostly about like I was solving my own need. But interestingly, I wasn't the only one. So more people started like you started using it, getting involved, and it became a, I don't want to say a big thing because it's not a big thing, but it became a thing. I mean, if you're looking for like cross-platform libraries, especially for desktop, we're the only ones. It's actively maintained. Right now we have Linux, Windows, Mac OS, iOS. We're finishing Android support. We have bindings for C++, C, Python. We're adding bindings for JVM, and we're thinking about expanding this to like more languages and environments. And it's only because we thought about this very thoroughly early on that we designed a very simple API where everything else can be built upon easily. One thing I did notice that was part of my frustration here is usually what I've noticed is that engineers, when they're building products, they usually push complexity to the user. Say, oh, I don't want to have to deal with this or think about that, so I'm just going to give you all the options and you figure it out. And in reality, that I think it's actually a bad thing, because turns out 80-90% of use cases would work pretty well with sensible defaults. You just need to think what those are, which is not a trivial task, and you find some limitations. But if you have that, then yeah, sure, you can do whatever you want, and you have all the you can like once you have a very simple thing that everybody can understand and use, adoption becomes easy. And why would you use something else? I mean, we've had this discussion. For example, there's another Python library that does, I mean, it's pretty good, but it's built around like fully async interfaces. So every time if you need to use it, you're dealing with async IO, runtime loops, and all of that. And there's some I mean, that imposes some additional complexity, especially if you want to run a very simple program. Why have to, and also you're responsible for handling the run loop. It's not handled by the library itself. So you have to think about all those things, and you can run yourself into a situation where you go into a deadlock. All of that is, again, just because the design is limited in that way.
Mm.
And again, just by thinking how what's a good and simple way to do this, and to how do people derive value from this? Building that and then dealing yourself with the complications around it, in which, yes, sometimes if you look at the insides of SimpleBLE, things are very complicated because, again, we have a very strong contract that we keep, and sure, the OS has to fit into the contract, and sometimes the abstractions on both ends don't fit very well. So you have to really think, okay, what's the best way to do this in a way that's clean, doesn't crash, etc., etc.
So it seems like one of the things that you bring is uniformity, consistency across different operating systems, which I imagine just makes things simple for people to understand. But what are the potential users or customers for this that when you see them, you're like, you'd be crazy not to be using our product? And what are the ones where, maybe it's an edge case, maybe we can help a bit, but it's less. How would you just define the sweet spot?
So I think the sweet spot comes when you as a company are building an SDK for your product. I think because right now, most companies that build Bluetooth products are only focused on mobile. So they have to maintain an Android version of their SDK and an iOS version of their SDK. And they're not, and you can tell by using both apps, they're different code bases. And sometimes features that are available in one are not in the other. And you have to, because again, you have to make this split because there's no solution around that. And if you just integrate the communication part into your library and then handle everything else, and then you build your business logic on top, it becomes a lot easier. So I would say that's the primary use case. It's like, hey, you sort of generalize that logic into it, which is what most of our customers generally do. They have some application and they want to wrap it and then use it across multiple platforms. But also, this now opens up the possibility of using your device on a computer. So you can now have a desktop app offering these things. You can have like more complicated versions. There's an interesting example here. Nordic Semi, they are the makers of this, the NRF 52, 53, and now 54. Like, it's a very popular Bluetooth chip. All their, like, for example, their DFU libraries, they're built for
DFU is what?
Firmware upgrade. Their firmware upgrade libraries,
Yeah.
they are built for separately as an Android and an iOS package. But if you use their client, their app on desktop, it doesn't work. You have to get a specially flashed adapter that they have to run it if you want to use it locally instead of using your computer hardware. And this is one of the products that we have in the sort of very early stage to, like, okay, package this and just, hey, here's your device, you connect to it, you can upgrade it, and it just works. And again, it just built around this idea. It's like, why is the desktop environment so neglected? And I think it is because it's hard to do these kinds of, again, it's already hard to do this on mobile platforms, but you're sort of forced to because that's your main contact point with your customers. But now you can also add desktop platforms. You can think of new use cases, more powerful use cases, because now you have a device that is not power constrained, can maintain connections for longer. And also, because of that, if you want to automate stuff, for example, say you're building a medical device, you can now have a test bench where a computer automatically runs your tests with your device without any sort of human intervention. You don't need to have an app emulator or to simulate like someone like clicking. Like, you can just make it work, and you can do it at a scale that otherwise is not possible.
No, I'm interested in who's using it. Any specific or abstracted to protect the innocent examples of people using your.
I mean, there are quite a few medical device companies that are using it. That was the thing that also shocked me the most. Is like by the time we reached year 4 and sort of guessing from the comments and people like reaching out, it's like, oh crap, there's a lot of companies using this for medical devices. And that was something unexpected, but also we've seen cases in entertainment, security, like devices, for example, for scanning passports, stuff like that. And the list just goes on. Automotive as well. There are a few names. I mean, on the website you can sort of see a few of our biggest
No, I saw Fender. That attracted my idea. So how do you use it's with a guitar or an amplifier or
Yes, it's for one of their amplifiers. I don't know the exact model, but yeah,
uh,
they are. They're very. I mean, they're actually they've been very happy with the results because I like the way they present about it. It's like they're musicians first, engineers. So what they care about is building like great musical products. That's what they do. That's their focus. You when you talk to them, you can see the spark in their eyes when they're like showing, "Hey, we're doing this and that." And for them, Bluetooth is just a thing they need solved. They don't need to spend months and months of time maintaining multiple apps and all that. So, hey, it's just there. And the fact that we can help them is very valuable for them. And they've been very grateful and also have provided great feedback on how we can keep improving things so that they get more value out of it.
very good. So tell me a bit more about the next level down, about the facilities that you offer, and you use a buzzword that is very familiar to BLE experts. GAT. What's GAT?
So GAT is the general attribute table. Basically, the way Bluetooth works is when you connect to a device, you present a series of services and characteristics which you could consider talking from a sort of an internet based viewpoint. It's like, okay, these are like endpoints or URLs where you can like interact and send data back and forth. So, for example, if you have a heart rate monitor, there's going to be there's a service for heart rate monitor features, and one of those characteristics within that service is going to be heart rate. So when you read that characteristic, the value you're going to get is the heart rate, which for standard services, like for example, heart rate, uh, the units and everything is already defined as part of the standard. You just connect to a device, you know what it is, you know how to read it, and you can just parse it. That's how, for example, when you have one of these devices and you connect to it with your phone, your Apple Health can automatically like grab the data, store it, and show it to you later on because again, all of this is already standardized. And in my opinion, it's a great way of like building devices because you can isolate functionality for every specific endpoint. Of course, there's some limitations around how much data you can send, if you have large blobs of data, how you can transmit them over. But in the end, it's for I would say 90 99% of all applications that you can think of that require like some sort of mobile connectivity as this one is more than enough.
Very good. And what is central mode and what is peripheral mode?
Okay, so central mode is when the device you're operating initiates the connection to another device. You're the on a sort of low level. What's happening is the device that actually sets the timing for communications is the central one. So basically, BLE works by communicating over like pre-specified like windows of time. So like, okay, we're gonna talk here. We're gonna talk again in say 15 milliseconds at this other like frequency here, and then sort of move back and forth. And all the timing for this is controlled by the central. So it's usually the device that initiates that connection and interacts with the peripheral. Peripheral mode is the other side of this engagement. You're a device that accepts connections, and usually you're providing some sort of service to the central device. For example, you're a heart rate monitor, blood pressure, or whatever other thing you can think of. Interestingly, you can also, once you're connected, the central can also offer services and characteristics to the peripheral. For example, one of the most common ones is the name. So, for example, when you've paired with a device and the device tell you, "Oh, you're paid with Kevin's iPhone," Kevin's iPhone was actually a property that the phone as a central presented to the peripheral, and the peripheral actually stored when bonding was happening.
So if I've got like a heart rate monitor that I've strapped to my chest to measure when I'm going for a run, that would be the peripheral, and
Yes, and
okay,
your
and
phone
then
would
the
act as the
phone would
central.
be the central. Okay,
Yes. The main difference in functionality between central and peripheral is when you're acting as a central, you expect services and characteristics to be provided to you, while as a peripheral, you are the one presenting these to the world. So you need to have a way of. That's why functionally it's different for SimpleBLE in one mode and the other, because for peripheral, you need to say, oh, these are the features I provide, and you're responsible for sending the data for that for those services.
So a Bluetooth beacon, got to get back to that, as that was the genesis of this podcast. That's an example of a peripheral.
Correct. Yes. A beacon is a case of a peripheral device where you usually don't connect to it. So you only rely on the advertising process to exchange information. There's some, I mean, you have like advertising and scanning, advertising being just the device saying, hey, I'm this and here's some data. Scanning is the central seeing that advertisement saying, hey, I think you have more information. Can you send me that, please? And you have like sort of a second advertisement packet where you can send more data over. But but in most cases, when it comes to like beacons, you deal with non-connectable devices.
Yeah, which is why they can scale, and they're so good for public spaces and so forth, where
Yes.
you're like shopping malls and airports. So I noticed that you offer consulting as well as license the software. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you decided to package and price what you offer? And I'm interested in how many of your customers end up using your consulting services, and how important is that? It's obviously a good source of revenue because there's always a shortage of talent, but I'm interested as an entrepreneur, would you say it was important to offer consulting in order to get adoption of your product?
Not really. So there's a bit of history here. SimpleBLE started as a fully open source project. And basically, once I left Neuralink and switched jobs to another company that was not focused on embedded devices, mainly I'm now working on AI, as everybody else, my focus on working on SimpleBLE sort of faded away because it felt less important, it was less relevant to my work, so I wasn't spending that much time with it. And I noticed like very quickly as I stopped being as involved, like quality started to decay, like features that, for example, Android support was something that I've always wanted to do, but now I didn't have the time or now the interest in doing it. And a friend basically suggested, hey, usually if you get paid to do something, you'll feel more motivated to do it. And his idea was, why don't you like switch the license to something that is like more restricted for commercial use, basically requiring to purchase the license instead of just using it for free. And you see what happens. If nobody buys it, basically the trend was going to still be the same. But if there's interest, okay, there's something, someone cares about it, and it makes sense to invest more resources into it. And it's been a bit of a bumpy ride. I'm not going to become a millionaire by selling a Bluetooth library, but it's been a very, I would say the process on its own has been a lot more interesting in like learning, okay, what is necessary to grab a small project like this one and actually put it out commercially. The way I describe it is SimpleBLE is not like a big software corporation. It's more like your, your corner bakery. Like it's a very small shop. We do a few things. Everything's like it's not industrialized. It's say handmade, organic, natural, if you want to sort of describe it that. I mean, it's a small project. I've been able, thanks to the commercial offering, to bring some people at least part time into the ecosystem, and we've been able, thanks to that, this past year we've been able to dedicate almost another 1,000 hours of work into the project, and some additional things that we're working on, like hopefully in the future might pan out as like bigger features. And this was all thanks to all these companies that believed in us, trusted us, and wanted us to like actually help them solve the problem with Bluetooth, because it's not a done deal. And it's even in cases where other libraries exist, we've had clients just asking us, hey, I'd rather use yours because it's better, it's simpler, and I have someone to talk to that will actually respond if I need help.
Mm.
And the consulting part was basically just a thing we threw on top. It's like, hey, okay, we're selling the licenses, but at the same time, someone might need extra help. Let's offer that. We divided it into two tiers. We've got what's called the SimpleBLE consulting tier, which is, hey, I'd like to use SimpleBLE for my application, and I need help integrating it, or I need a feature for SimpleBLE. That's how peripheral support was actually born. It's like, hey, I need this feature. You seem like the best one to do it, so I want to hire you. And the advanced BLE is more for things that are BLE related, but are more these are more focused on like things that don't necessarily involve simple BLE itself, where it's more about like, okay, research, or hey, I'd like to test some integrations with this product, and I want you to reverse engineer the API, things like that. So it was more about, it's for basically the rest where we need basically more resources to focus on. But usually most of the consulting we've sold has been around SimpleBLE itself. Revenue wise, it's been more or less half and half. So consulting has been a big part of it, but at the same time, it's also the thing that has been the most work intensive. So ideally, I'd like to focus more on licensing, because it's something more stable. And as we've evolved, we've also like improved our license for this process to make it sort of easier for like continued support and all that. And we think and we think also in terms of pricing, we sort of eyeballed it a little bit around, okay, what are other offerings? What's your cost on doing it yourself? And we also, again, it's not about becoming millionaires with this. It's mostly about the experience, and to basically make sure that the costs are covered and the library can continue growing. So we try to keep it as fair as possible. We have a sort of a startup tier that is designed to be free. It's like, sure, you sign the license, but it's free. The idea is for you to get used to it, to get involved. We also get to know you, to understand your use case, so that we can build better features for you. And then as the company grows, we have like two different tiers that sort of follow that sort of growth.
Very cool. So you've experienced firsthand the evolution of the open source approach. Anything that you would like to say, or any observations on where open source is headed? It seems it's so central to what we do, but I assume it's not static in terms of the norms.
It's definitely not static. I mean, one of the recent trends is like more projects going down the commercial route. And I think it's actually a very positive thing. And probably a lot of people are going to be very angry at this point. But the reality is that for especially niche projects like SimpleBLE, there isn't enough interest from large companies, let's say Microsoft, Facebook, Google, etc., to sponsor them, because their bottom line is not affected by this. So they have no reason whatsoever to put money, aside from maybe the generosity of an employee that's willing to be your champion inside the company. And the reality is that because of that, lots and lots of projects of this size end up becoming abandonware on GitHub. And we did a sort of very preliminary study, and I think around 60% of projects of the sort of same type have been abandoned for more than a year. And you look at the code, and sometimes it's very good, like great ideas, very interesting, but you just need a bit more to like get it to the point where it can reach that. And we haven't seen any. And it's not, basically, I would say from all the open source ecosystem, there's that specific niche that is currently very underserved. And I've been talking with people in the industries, even open source industry, like Canonical, and they acknowledge that, yes, there's a small portion of projects that are important, they add value, but they're not big enough for anybody to actually care about them. And right now, those projects are screwed. As simple as that. It's like, unless they find a source of funding, they will eventually die out. And because of this, the sort of the parent company that we built for SimpleBLE, we call it the California Open Source Company. The overall mission here is not just to serve SimpleBLE, but to help other projects that are in this stage to go from like fully open source and no resources whatsoever to go commercial, to the point where at least some additional work can go into it and the developers can manifest their vision to its fullest potential.
Interesting. So with open source, it seems like if it's a really niche product, then people want to, if they're giving their time for free, they want to know that this is important and that they're impacting lots of things. And if that's not the case, then why bother? Whereas if you find a niche market that's willing to pay, then it's worth paying attention. And maybe the converse is true. If you've got something which is free and lots of people are using it, then there's more motivation to keep on making it free, because you're doing something of consequence with your life.
Yes, but it goes even beyond that, because if you make a project that becomes really popular, like millions and millions of users, you fall into a category that I call too big to fail. Basically, so many people depend on what you're doing, including big companies, that it's better for them to sponsor you, because otherwise their own revenue stream will be affected.
Mm.
But in a case, I mean, SimpleBLE is a good example. Sure, I mean, there are other ways to do this, and they're not as painful, but there's value there, but it's not as great, and it also doesn't affect any big company's bottom line, because otherwise, yeah, sure, they'll spend like a couple hundred more engineering hours on this feature instead of just purchasing our license, but they can still do it. And you end up in that kind of situation. But when it comes to a small developer in a project, it's not just the, oh, I want to see it matters. It's also the relationship you have with the people using it. Because, for example, before going commercial, I've had companies reach out to us asking, hey, I want this feature. Can you do it? And when you tell them, sure, but it's, I don't know, like 200 hours of work, are you willing to pay for it? You hear crickets. They just ghost you. They don't want to get involved, or it's even worse. Sometimes they demand fixes or what. Like, this broke. I mean, this is breaking production. Why can't you fix it now? Like, I don't. But you don't work on this. So there's also like, it's not just it's like it's the positive side from the user, but it's also a very toxic component here. And when you're most of these projects have just one or maybe two developers, and they're doing it on their free time, and they spent maybe thousands of hours on this. It's it's very easy for a project like this to fall out of grace, even for life circumstances, because, oh, I don't know, they need to, I don't know, one a developer wants to move to a bigger place, so they need a bigger income, and they cannot use this time for that. They have to like get a different job or something else. So I think we're losing a lot of people to this situation, and there are lots of very small niche problems that every time you sort of face them, you realize, like, this should be easier. This can't be that hard when you're developing on something. And that's the sort of indication that, okay, something's going on there. And a
Mm.
lot of times solutions exist, and like, oh, the approach was great, but they stopped maintaining it, I don't know, 3 years ago, and I cannot use it because technology has moved past.
Yeah.
That's the sort of the saddest thing. And we really want to fix that. We really want to find a sort of balance. And again, it's not about getting rich. It's about like making sure these things are sustainable, because in no other industry is free stuff pretty much a right as with the software industry. And sure, for certain companies, again, like big companies sponsoring projects. For example, I think Meta did a great job by open sourcing React, and a lot of their internal tools are also open, because now they've standardized whole industries around their own technologies, which is great, and that makes sense. But it's not that same scheme doesn't apply for smaller projects, because I mean, sure, a couple people can learn simple BLE, but I'm not going to become an industry standard. So it's not realistic.
Kevin, I've been really interested as I've been learning a bit more about you, your business. But one of the things that fascinated me was your connection with Argentina. So that's where did you spend your entire early part of your life in that country, or what's the story there?
Yes, that's correct. So I was born there in 1991, so 30 plus years ago. I don't want to know the exact number at this point.
Hmm.
And yeah, I did most. I graduated high school and did my university studies there, and then I moved to the U.S. just before the pandemic. So that was
Mm.
I, I got to the U.S. I think a month before lockdowns started and all that, and it's been a very interesting journey to see everything that has happened since. I would sort of call them humble beginnings. Uh,
Yeah.
when I was just a student and like dreaming of everything that's all the things that cool things that were happening all over the world, and to be able to get it somehow involved into that, it was I think it's a really big sort of thing that my younger self would be very impressed.
Yeah, I grew up in England, as you can probably tell from my accent, and I kind of looked at the planes flying towards America and looked at all the American TV and saw all the inventions, the goings on in Silicon Valley. And back when I first came over, the internet didn't exist, but there were the newspapers in Silicon Valley, and you can look at the adverts for this is who Apple was recruiting, and just being, I felt like, oh man, I've arrived. So I imagine you must have had a similar thing of seeing this ecosystem from afar. What was that like for you?
I mean, since I was young, I was always connected to the tech world in one way or another. So I would follow news coming out of here closely, but it's a very different experience to actually living in that space, to seeing it firsthand. I mean, it's still a weird thought to say, oh, I'm driving past that building. Oh, Facebook is there. That's where they make Instagram. Oh, there's Oracle. I don't know. I mean, all the tech companies, they're pretty much all here. So it's like, go, and you recognize all the brands. And back back then, they would seem like something that's so far away, like so out of place from where you're from. And to just be there and see, okay, there's the building. I can walk in and say hello to people. And it's that, I think, is a sort of a experience you don't really get until you go through it. If you're born here and this is a common thing, you don't understand how much of a privileged position it is to be close by to where things happen. And all the, for example, right now with all the like autonomous robots and self-driving cars, you see them on the street. They're there. They're not just a video clip you see on your screen. They're there. You walk past, you see a Waymo go by, you see self-driving Teslas, you see robots. It's that part is still, I mean, I'm mind blown. And I've been here for 4 years at this point, and almost five. And it's still like, it blows my mind.
Yeah, I heard someone say that some of the greatest film cinematographers are foreigners who then decamped to America, and the reason they were so good was that they still had a sense of wonder about the landscape and everything. You're seeing it almost from this childish perspective, and I certainly feel the same way. The palm trees never get old for me. Although Argentina's pretty. I don't know what's the geography of Argentina like compared to California?
Oh, so the weather here in California is more or less similar to where I'm from, the city of Buenos Aires. Although down there it's a lot more humid, both in the summer and the winter. But generally, like the temperature range is more or less the same. There's no snow. Humidity is different, but aside from that, and also it's a lot sunnier here in California compared to down there. But geography-wise, Argentina has pretty much the same features as you would find in the US. Uh, I mean, there's both, like, you've got glaciers, deserts, rainforests, and everything in between. So it's a beautiful place to go and visit.
Yeah.
You you can definitely, like, just by, I mean, I think it's the 10th biggest country in terms of matters of surface. So it's a very big place. It's very empty as well. The entire country has the population of California, but one third of that is concentrated in Buenos Aires and the metropolitan area around it. So once you leave that area, it's very sparse. There's not much. There's a lot of nature. There's not much civilization going on. So you can drive for hours and hours. There's a famous route that goes towards the Andes Mountains, where you're driving for, I think, around 10 to 12 hours through a desert, and the road just goes straight through the middle of the desert. And most accidents there happen because people get bored, fall asleep, and just like drive off the road. So you have those sorts of environments where there's like absolutely nothing for like miles and miles and miles and miles.
So was it difficult to get into the States or not?
For me, I was very lucky to find a company that was very interested in hiring me over. So, short summary is a project that I worked on for my graduation that ended up becoming my first startup. Well, that project wound down in 2015, sorry. And by that time, so it's sort of, I shelved everything, I had everything there, but I found a company working on the same thing in the 2020s. And I basically reached out to the CEO and CTO saying, hey, I know exactly what you're building. I know how to build it. I have all this expertise. Bring me over. At that point, I was convinced I wanted to come to the US to live. And basically, they were like, they saw the potential and they were like very eager to bring me over. And thanks to that, there are a few interesting visa programs, especially when you're collaborating with universities that can get you here fast. So what I was working on was I was working for them, but also helping as a I forgot the exact name of the title, but basically like guiding practical assignments for students for the UMass Boston. So both things were happening in parallel. UMass Boston is a great program to help startups in Massachusetts to like recruit talent from abroad by basically co-sponsoring their visas and all that. It's a very interesting program, by the way, and that was basically my step in. And once I got in, I sort of moved along from.
Yeah. And what was the technical hook? What was it that your startup was working on?
So my first startup was a company built around measuring electrical signals from the forearm, from this area here, to recognize hand gestures. So the very basics we had was like you could move your hand up, down, open your hand, or close your fist. Those would generate very specific electrical signals on the forearm that we could measure, and we would use that as a sort of input for computer, phone, video games, etc. That was the sort of vision that we had in. Interestingly, despite the technology being available for so long, there haven't been many commercial deployments of this. Even the ones that Meta, for example, has been pushing after purchasing all the IP from a product called Mayo. I forgot the company name, but all that is still like in like somewhere around it. We also did a whole bunch of development around just recognizing gestures based on IMU, so just movement without any electrical signals, and that is like sort of slowly coming in. But I'm at this point, I don't really know why this never happened. I know there's a company that I follow on LinkedIn that every once in a while they post like similar demos to the ones we were doing like almost a decade ago at this point, and it's still not a product. And honestly, I don't know why. And to answer your question, the company was doing something very similar, but measuring electrical signals in the wrist instead of the forearm. But conceptually, everything was the same.
So this seems like this put you on a trajectory to work at Neuralink, right?
Correct. I mean, I do have most of my professional experience has been around embedded devices, talking over Bluetooth, with some connection to biological signal processing because of this, and that I think was sort of the entry into Neuralink. Also, for my second startup, I had a bunch of experience like dealing with more complicated problems, like lots of devices. As a matter of fact, the project I presented for when applying at Neuralink was how we solve the communication between our sensor gateways and all the sensor networks that we would deploy for this company. I'll go into details maybe a bit later on. And yeah, it was mostly, I would say the thing that they liked was that I was a good a good generalist that wasn't afraid of jumping into any kind of difficult problem and was versatile enough to figure out, okay, if I need to learn something or just enhance my skills to be able to solve a problem, I would easily be able to do it. So for anyone who is like willing to apply to any of Elon's companies in general, is as long as you're good at what you're doing, you're definitely getting in. That's
All right.
the key point, I would say.
Okay. So the secret is be good.
Yes. You'd be surprised at how easy it sounds, but how hard it is. I mean, I've interviewed people who had, I don't know, like 10, 15 years of experience on top of my years of experience. And sure, they were very good at a very narrow topic, but the moment you shifted the focus outside of that, they would just fall apart. And dealing with a very complicated device, as is a brain implant, you need to know about those topics. You need to understand about how RF works, how control systems work. Yeah, I don't know. I forgot what else. I mean, signal processing in general. I mean, you're dealing with biological signals. Okay, so any sort of processing around that, good handling of statistics, because some algorithms are statistical in nature. So you need to determine, okay, what's the best way to do this, and to understand the physics of it, because you're dealing with, well, electromagnetism, heat. It's all those things matter. So you don't have to be totally proficient, but you have to be, I would call it, conversational in all those topics. You need to understand what the core concepts are, how to communicate them, how to at least operate with them.
Very interesting. And so, how did you get the job? Became aware of the company and you went to their website and applied, or what was it?
Yes. Surprisingly, yes. I knew nobody there. So this was like right in the middle of the pandemic, the height of all that. I had, at my past job in Boston, I felt a little bit, I was liking the company a bit less once I joined. Internal politics were a bit too much for my liking, and the company was shifting its focus away from biosignals to more, let's say, defense kind of oriented projects.
Mhm.
That wasn't really my thing. I mean, the reason I joined them initially was to help people. So then the first product designed to help people with ALS to communicate. So because usually they keep some sort of electrical activity, it might not be enough to actually move the hand or some muscles, but it's enough that you can actually detect it. So that was my initial attraction to a company. Like, hey, this is using technology I have, and we're doing like good. We're trying to help people. And when that was sort of like when the focus of the company was shifting away from that, I realized, okay, it's not the thing I wanted to do. And a friend of mine actually told me, hey, Neuralink is recruiting embedded engineers. Their description of what they're looking for is very similar to what you did. So why don't you apply? And I just applied online. Described everything. Like went through the process, had a call with my boss, sent me the sort of practical assignment to do at home. Spend a full weekend just like doing the best I could out of that. It was like it ended up being like, I don't know how many thousand lines of codes, like I think 12 pages of documentation. It was like insane. But I really wanted to get in. I really wanted to get in. And so there was that. Then a phone call with my boss's boss. Then they flew me over, more exercises, meeting a larger portion of the team, seeing the sort of the soft part of the interview. Like how would you fit in with the culture? And yeah, once they said, oh, yeah, we like you, we'd like to come here. We figured out all the like immigration paperwork to get transferred over, and I started working for them just after the Three Little Pigs demo in September 2020.
And what was that demo? I've seen the thing with people, but which is amazing.
So this was the first like public demo showing that they could capture signals from a live animal, and they did a live demo about it. So showing, hey, here's a pig. Look, the implant is connected to a sensory part that's connected to the snout. So every time they boop the snout, that you could see the activity going on. And I was unfortunately wasn't able to attend because I wasn't an employee yet. I was already here in California when all this happened, but I started a couple days after. So I even missed a very big party they had afterwards that I'm still a little bit salty about. I'm not gonna lie about it, but yeah, it was a great experience.
And what was the test? What did you have to do in the weekend? What was the assignment they gave you?
It was actually very simple. It's like, here's a temperature sensor, write a driver for it. But the thing here is the constraint is, okay, this temperature sensor is working in a safety critical scenario where hardware can fail in any way. How do you deal with that? And that's when you actually have to start thinking the problem through first principles. It's not just, okay, what's wrong with the software, but what could be wrong with the hardware? What kind of communication could be, basically what kind of messages could go wrong? How could you detect them? What happens if a line goes up, stays down? How do you see it? How do you recognize it? What information does the hardware provide? And you have to like diagram the whole all possible failure modes and then say, okay, how can my software detect each one of them and build the whole driver around that? So for example, if you detect that the system has crashed from what seems like a hardware failure, at some point you should stop trying because you might cause further damage. Things like that. It's the test itself is not very difficult. I mean, any like fresh grad can definitely do it, but what sets candidates apart is usually how far they can think along these lines.
Amazing. But my first technical job was writing device drivers, actually. And I wrote a book about it. I wasn't actually very good at writing the device drivers, but I thought the book was pretty good. So what did you end up doing at Neuralink? What was your job?
My job there was embedded systems engineer for the implant. So my role took like working on the code running within the implant and all the SDKs, like SDKs and tooling around it. So because of the nature of this device, there's a lot of testing required, and we did automate a lot of it. And for that, you need like like a big layer of software supporting all of that on the outside. The great thing is a lot of this also translated to the manufacturing line. So we basically like we're very embedded into any sorts of activity around the implant. And it was also a great experience because I had the chance to be involved in pretty much every aspect of the lifetime of an implant, from manufacturing to testing to even destructive testing. Those are fun. And yeah, just and you basically get involved and you learn about, okay, what are the use cases, what's the infrastructure, the scale of it as well. Because something that I don't know many people realize from like what everything that goes into like testing a medical device, especially something as novel as this, is how much you need to test. Because the thing I described previously, okay, you have to find out all the failure modes and understand why they can happen, how they can happen, how can you detect it, how can you mitigate them. Now imagine that not just on a driver layer, but on a full device layer, on something that's very complex, multiple parts, and it's the same thing. It's like, okay, there's some principles you can apply to make things safer by design. For example, I don't know, the hardware being limited to like the hardware on its own cannot affect any damage because it doesn't have any way of producing damage. Or from the software layer to say, okay, I'm going to assume that any communication will be compromised. So any command I receive, I will determine if it's safe enough before executing it. Stuff like that.
Hmm.
There's that sort of thinking that goes into it. And of course, testing, because you have to make sure, okay, let's cause this failure and see if you're actually like following that and what can happen. Plus also the scale of it, because when you're building something like this, you want to make sure that even rare accidents or rare failure modes don't happen. And the only way to do it is to test lots and lots of devices, because let's say you have a failure mode that happens, I don't know, 1 in 10,000. You have to test 10,000 devices to find that one, recognize, oh, this is a new failure mode, document it, and apply all the fixes and mitigations across the entire chain. So that's more or less the kind of work that happened there. It's about, okay, we need these features and we need to test them, and every problem that comes up, we need to have a solution for it.
And were you doing any work with Bluetooth as part of the project?
I mean, yes. So as Elon has said multiple times, the idea is for the implant to become the Fitbit for the brain, and the main protocol that is pretty much everywhere and lets you do that is Bluetooth. It's the only one that is power efficient and has a decent enough throughput rate where these kinds of activities can happen. I mean, Wi-Fi would be great if you could stream such a volume of data, but if an implant like that had Wi-Fi, probably the battery wouldn't last more than, I don't know, 5-10 minutes.
But the frequency that Bluetooth works at is famous for not going through water or flesh. So how do you overcome that?
Making sure the antenna points out, not in.
Okay.
It's basically that. There was I was just tangentially involved in that, but yeah, the team that designed the antenna for the implant is just something out of this world. They're like one of the smartest people I've ever met,
Yeah.
and they do magic.
Yeah.
That's antenna design is one of those things where I'm not very familiar, and seeing what they can do and like how all these things affect the result, it's almost magical at this point. So or alchemy.
Yeah. Wiliot's antenna design team, they were like, I saw them as gods, really. And interesting, quite gender diverse. So there's something about good antenna design that seems to be a really good fit to diverse teams. So what, if you had to put your finger on how the team got so much done. I mean, this is a common theme in the projects that Elon does, is just kind of seeming to do the impossible, and okay, maybe it's not exactly when it was promised, but it's also 10 times faster than anyone else thought was possible. So how how does what's your perspective, having worked in one of those teams? How is it that these teams get so much done and achieve things that no one else can do?
I think, I mean, it's a great question. I think that it's a combination of two factors. So one, there's the talent and the sort of the skills of the person. A way Elon would usually say is you have to hire people where skill to ego ratio is a lot greater than one. So you want people that are very smart, very capable, but also easy to work with, so they can recognize when they're wrong and fix their mistakes. Because there's nothing worse than someone being very confidently wrong.
Mm.
And that's one. And the other one, I think, is personal accountability. The way I would describe it is it's not that a certain team is responsible for a certain component, part, whatever. It's a certain person. So if anything happens with that, you know who to go to, you know who to ask. And that person is the one that will respond. And it makes sure that because you know, "Oh, I'm responsible for this," you make really damn sure that it works. Because otherwise, okay, you're the one who everybody's going to be looking like, "Hey, what's up?"
Mm.
So you there's a lot of if those I would say if those two bases are well covered, the rest sort of falls in line on its own because you avoid diluting responsibility, and you have people actually capable and executing on those responsibilities. I think that's pretty much it. There's no secret sauce aside from just finding good people and making sure they know what they're working on, which is something that in the past I've seen is like it's very it doesn't normally happen. I mean, culturally, we tend to say, "Oh, it's I don't know, it's the firmware team, it's the hardware team," and I don't know. Let's ask someone. Someone shows up. "Oh, I did not design this component. I don't know." You have to find someone else. They have to ask their boss, or maybe that person left, or like all those things add up in terms of inefficiencies. And once you have this in place, execution just happens. It's wonderful to see. It's like we would have the sort of the cycle around this, and Neuralink would be great because you would see, oh, we have this really big problem that we don't know how to solve, and everybody's focused on that thing, and in 2 weeks, it's a done deal. It's like, okay, sure, yeah, we got it. We know what we need to do. It's done. Mitigations, everything is implemented, and we move forward. And that sort of continuous like focus and improvement and going that keeps you that basically gets you that far.
And then sort of project methodology, sort of stand-up meetings, sprints, and
I mean, you talk. I mean, there's a bit of structure, but in the end, again, you're personally responsible for a certain part of the stack. You just make sure that the thing you're working on is important for the company goals, which you'll talk with your manager, and that's it. And your manager will basically communicate up and down to make sure that these priorities are correctly set, and they're also communicate up saying, okay, this is our status, this is what we're doing, this is how things are going. And that's it. In terms of like how much structure, there's not more structure than that. So, and again, you know what you're doing, and by keeping like very small teams and very focused, you don't need to have that much overhead in terms of communication, because it's all of this happens. You can keep it in your mind. You understand. You can keep the entire state of your project in your mind, and every time you go in the morning, you know what to do. You know where you're left. You know what to do, and you know what the plan is. You have a vision for what you're working on, and that sort of continuity is great for these kinds of things, because you don't. Again, it prevents the dilution of responsibility.
Yeah. But how do you structure the project? Is there a Gantt chart? Are you kind of doing iterative stuff or status reports? How does that all
No,
work?
none of that. It was just one-on-ones with our manager, and it was things revolved around, hey, we need this feature or we need to solve this problem, and it would be like, okay, I'll start working on it. I don't know, depending on how complex it was, like it's done either in a couple days or maybe a couple weeks, and it's just status reports. Like, hey, uh, one way to look at it is when it comes to defining priorities is there's usually a global priority, and everything stems down from that. At my time at Neuralink, it was okay. We need to get to humans, so this means going through like building a device that is human grade and getting all the necessary approvals. And that was the main directive. That was the only thing that mattered, and every decision and every step you took was filtered by that. So you knew, okay, is this getting us closer to this? Yes or no? If no, okay, you should be doing something else. And if you can solve for that, if you can understand, okay, if for the company to the next existential risk or the next goal is this, then it's very easy for everybody to know, oh, how I'm contributing to that to the goal. And if you're not, if suddenly, hey, I'm not doing any, if you're like, hey, nothing that I'm doing is helping achieve that goal, okay, it's a good opportunity to talk to your manager and say, hey, I'm not helping the company goals, so why don't we focus on something else?
Mm.
Which is, I mean, it's pretty much the same thing that the way he's manages all his companies. Like, okay, there's an overarching goal, and everybody should decide their own goals based on that.
Very interesting. So did you get to meet him?
Yes, I was there for several meetings, all hands. So he would come by like every once in a while. He's very tall. I mean, I'm not particularly short or tall, but he's like more than I think head and a half taller than me. Like, oh man, he's a big dude. But yeah, no, I mean, I would say he's as a boss, I would say he's one of the most reasonable ones I've had. He's a very non-bullshit kind of person. So it's like, okay, give me the facts. Explain to me what you're doing, what the logic behind that is. He'll point out, hey, have you thought about this? Have you tried that? And based on that, you'll provide the feedback. And that was pretty much it. I mean, he would set ambitious goals, but he knew exactly how far along to place them so that they would still be reasonable. It's like, okay, it's because I've had managers in the past that have said, oh, we need to do X, Y, Z. And it's like, you're basically asking me to do 2 years worth of work in a week. That's not going to happen. There's no way. But here would be something like, he would be asking, okay, this is I'd say it's a 4-month-long project that he's asking us to do in 2. That kind of thing. And it's like, okay, yeah, it's hard. We're probably not going to get there in 2, but maybe we can do it in 3. And you push, and because you're aiming for 2, sure, deadlines slip, whatever, but because you have that strong forcing function, it actually gets done in 3. And because again, for all the things I mentioned before, you have very clear responsibilities of who's responsible of what. And because of that, there's no responsibility dilution. So nobody can sort of point fingers to someone else and say, oh, I didn't do it because this other team didn't do it. It's like, no, you know exactly who's doing everything. And it's sort of, again, it makes sure that all the everybody's pushing in the same direction, and you get to that. Yes.
Very good. Well, I could talk to you all day about this, but we've got other parts of the conversation to do. And one of the most important ones is, of course, your 3 songs that have some meaning to you. So what was your first song?
So the first song, I forgot the actual, the artist's name, but it's was sung by Odessa. That one is, that song is the cover song that Neuralink used for the first promotional video. Yeah. So basically what happened, I mean, they put out this video, I forgot exactly when. I think it was already out when I applied. And I remember, like, just those days before I joined, I was playing that video and that music over and over because coming from Argentina, ended up working at such a place that was pretty much my sort of my past self dream. Like, okay, I made it. I got here. It's happening. It's, oh my God, it's happening. And the sort of the big shift in my career that happened after that, because again, once you start working in such an environment, I can definitely say my engineering skills have improved a lot just by being surrounded by people who have done this for long enough and teach you how to think this way. It's not something that you learn in college, so you really need to be exposed to this kind of environment. and you do get, and for me, it was sort of intoxicating at that point. And it's a very clear, for me, it's a very clear reminder of basically that you can just do things, and even the things that seem insanely far away, you can actually get there. It can happen. It's a lot of work, but you can get there. And it's, for me, it's that reminder. It can happen.
Very inspiring. Very inspiring. I love
Yep.
that. What a good choice. What about song number 2?
Song number 2 is Something Just Like This. That one was the song. It's a sort of a bit of more of a personal story. That's the song that made me realize I wanted to propose to my wife.
Okay.
I had been with her in a relationship at that point for, I think it was like 6 or 7 years. And I was on a trip, and I was in a trip with some friends, and they told me, hey, there was basically some things going on in the relationship. And when I told them, hey, this is happening, the response was like, you're an idiot. She wants you to propose. Just do it. And I was so, it was weird because I was so dumbstruck by that. Like, wait, really? That's what she wants? I missed that, but completely, like fully, to the point that after I got back, I basically apologized. Like, okay, now once the whole thing was sort of like, I apologize. Okay, now I understand. Sorry. But it like, wait, it's when you're like missing the hints, but completely. And when I came to the realization, I heard that song. I was staying at a like small hotel, and I was having breakfast when that song was playing on the TV, like in the dining area, and it sort of clicked. If you look at the lyrics, like "What you're looking, something just like this," and it's sort of like it made that click. It was this. It's this realization that, oh, you can actually, like, it's okay. I really want to marry this person. I want to go through with it, and I want to make this commitment. And again, just blasting that song over and over, like sort of reinforcing that feeling and all that. And yeah, we basically got engaged. I think it was still a year after that. No, wait, no. I got engaged a few months. No, my wife's gonna kill me. We got engaged a year after that, married a year after, so 2 years after that. So it took some time. And yeah, we've been married at this point. It's gonna be 5 years now in July, and we now have a 7-month-old daughter. So like we've come a long way since then.
And your wife's from Argentina as well?
Correct. Yes, I met her in college through a common friend, and we've been together since I think it was our second year. So yeah, it's been a huge, long journey. Looking at the pictures of us when we were that young, it's like, oh man, time has gone by.
Very good. And what's song number 3?
Song number 3 was it's a Basket Case by Green Day. Although I had a few others that could fit into that role, like Original Prankster by The Offspring. And basically, I like that song because it sort of symbolizes a bit of my, sort of, call it, crazy nature, in terms of, oh, I always want to do things, and like there's always something happening. And I'm also a little bit of an asshole, so like a reminder of that is also not a bad thing every once in a while. So I think those are like good reflections of my personality, and I think they're a great way of showing what you, or like expressing that sort of teenage anxiety, and like, oh, I want to try all these things, but everything's hard, everything's complicated, but I'm still gonna do it. I'm gonna mess up some people in the meantime. Like, you just go and do it. I think that sort of spirit is the thing I was trying to convey.
Well, you don't seem like a bad person. What's what, why do you say that?
The way my friends put it is, I'm as subtle as a brick to the face.
Okay.
It's I usually I this was something that sort of developed over the years, but I learned to be very direct, and I don't like when things are sugar coated in any way. So,
Hmm.
and instead of, if I think you're doing something wrong, I'm just gonna go and say it. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. And for example, I've been doing this. I've been helping some startups as an incubator here at UC Berkeley that I collaborate with as a mentor. And sometimes you have to tell participants, or like potential entrepreneurs, hey, your idea sucks. You should think of
Yeah.
something else. And I've had a few cases where I was the first person to actually tell them that. Because everyone's like, no, your idea is great. You should keep trying. But they're like lying to them, because you can tell from a mile away, the idea is bad. So I sort of doubled down on like brutal honesty. And hey, if I think you're doing something wrong, I'm going to tell it. And some people like it, some people don't. And fine when they get upset. But yeah, for those, I'm definitely the asshole kind of person.
Well, I have a startup I want to tell you about later, but we don't have time to talk about it now. Kevin, this is been wonderful. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks very much for coming on the show.
No, thank you very much.
Thanks for watching this episode of the Mr. Beacon Ambient IoT podcast here on YouTube. You can listen to this episode on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoyed it, please like and share this video. And be sure to subscribe for more videos. For more information about Wiliot, Ambient IoT, and IoT Pixels, head over to wiliot.com.